Hey everybody, I'm Russo and I do a little work here and there. It looks like we're back in the research workshop, and again this time we are talking about the basics of Papercraft articulation. We're going to call this 102. We had a 101, this would be 102. And where in the Papercraft Articulation 101 video we just sort of touched on everything, here we are going to touch on one thing in particular, which is what I considered before to be the most basic type of Papercraft articulation. And no, we're not talking about just folding the paper and then unfolding it. We're talking about a tube and a cylinder. This little double T-shaped piece is an excellent way to demonstrate that because one of the T's has a tube on it and the other T has a cylinder. And you can just ignore the other little bit on there. Though that is the same thing, it's just two cylinders that are linked together. Anyway, the idea is you have one of them go into the other one and then you can rotate it. Pretty nice. Also, if your model has some clearance issues, you can pull them apart a little bit, and the rotation still works. Imagine that. So it's a pretty simple thing, but you can make some pretty neat things with it. So if I take this double T design and replace the T's with, say, I don't know, a rectangle box and a smaller rectangle box, then you would get something like this. If you've seen the first Star Wars movie, then you probably recognize this. But if you don't, that's fine. Basically, it's just a turret. This turret, however, has 2 points of articulation, which for a turret is about all you need. So the top of the turret will rotate around, and the guns, which I guess in this case are anti-aircraft guns, will also rotate to point up or down. Look at that. Make a point straight up. Maybe cause some death from below. Anyway, this is basically the same thing, like I said. So if we pull the parts apart, you'll see that there's a cylinder coming out of the top and there's a tube that goes straight through the bottom part. So I imagine that could be a mounting point, but I haven't put too much thought into it. Maybe make some ruined bases for these. If the gun gets blown up, then you just pull it off and replace it with the other one. But moving on, we got the guns, and if you look at the gun thing in there real close, you'll be able to see what's going on. Basically, it's like a sledgehammer with 2 handles on it, but if you want a bigger gun like a cannon or something like that, you could just put one through it, and those are toothpicks with just a little bit of paper wrapped around. Really, that's not even necessary, but as I say so often, it is what it is. And in this case, it's a little turret. Of course, you don't have to stop here, because this tube and cylinder design is actually quite a bit more versatile than you'd imagine. So, say you're not making a turret, say you're making a giant robot or something, and in that case, instead of making a rectangle box and a smaller rectangle box, you'd have, the robot's chest and the robot's shoulder, and then the robot's arm would move up and down. Or you can imagine the larger rectangle box as the robot's forearm, and the smaller one as its fist. And in that case, with just this setup, you can see how the wrist would rotate around, and we'd either have whole hand or finger movement, depending on how it's set up. But, yeah, even if you are doing different types of articulation in your Papercraft, you're probably going to need at least a little bit of this, because, generally it's just a lot simpler. And if we look back at the 2 T's, you can imagine how you'd get a lot of motion out of just this one type of joint. So, yeah, that's basically that. Tube and a cylinder, how much are you supposed to say? So maybe next time we touch on this topic, I'll talk about something a little more complicated. But for now, bandwidth, you know how it is. So how about in the comments, you mention either a type of articulation that you'd like to see in paper, in before ball joints, or maybe something you would like to see articulated, because this time it's a turret, but I mentioned giant robots, so yeah, that's also a possibility. But until next time, you've been watching the Research Workshop on Russo Works, and I'm Russo. Out.